All right, today we're going to break down a really fascinating and, well, methodical strategy for interfaith dialogue. It's a step-by-step approach called the Master Key Method, and for this special deep dive explainer, we're going to investigate the very first foundational pillar it's built on. So let's get right into it.
This is the core challenge, isn't it? How do you move past the polite chit-chat and actually get into a real substantive conversation about faith? The method we're looking at today claims to be a precise tool designed to bridge that exact gap.
So what we're going to do is neutrally unpack this master key method, which is basically a strategy built on a series of core arguments they call pillars. And today, our focus is 100% on that very first one, the one the entire approach rests on.
So here's our roadmap. We'll start with the opening strategy, then dig into this whole corrupted Torah question. After that, we'll see what the Quran itself says, look at how the method handles verses on distortion, bring in some incredible external evidence, and then see the huge question this all leads to.
All right, let's get into the actual mechanics here. The whole method kicks off by tackling a very common and, honestly, a very foundational belief head-on, the idea that Jewish and Christian scriptures have been corrupted over time. Pillar 1 is built specifically to address this.
So, the conversation starts with this very direct, simple question. It just puts the core issue right on the table. Think of it as the starting block for the entire discussion that's about to unfold.
And boom! This follow-up question is where the strategy really kicks into gear. It takes this huge, vague idea and narrows the focus dramatically. The key here isn't just if it was changed, but when. And this before or after the 7th century distinction, well, that's the absolute pivot for the whole argument.
Now here's the twist. The argument doesn't start by trying to defend the Torah with outside evidence. No, it makes this really bold claim that the Quran itself, on its own terms, testifies to the reliability of the very Torah that existed back in the 7th century. Let's see how they build that case. So, let's look at the evidence. Where is this argument even coming from? Well, it's constructed using verses taken directly from the Quran, aiming to show that the book's own internal logic is what supports the entire case.
Okay, take this verse from Surah 7. That's chapter 7 of the Quran. The key word to lock onto here is find. It says prophecies about Muhammad can be found in the Torah people had with them at the time. The logic being presented is pretty straightforward. You can't find something that isn't actually there in the text.
And the argument keeps building from there. This next verse says the Quran is confirming that which is already with you. And that little phrase, with you, is seen as absolutely critical. It suggests a text that was present, accessible, right there with them in the 7th century, not some lost ancient original.
And as you can see from this table, the argument isn't just based on one or two verses. The method points to several different categories of affirmation. You can see how they've laid it out. Verses about finding prophecies, verses about direct confirmation, about the Torah being a reliable law code, and even verses that suggest consulting it to verify stories.
But it doesn't stop with just those verses. The source material brings in another line of reasoning it pulls from the Quran. This concept of a continuous, divinely protected transmission of the scripture all through history. They call it the unbreakable chain.
So this slide really helps you picture what they mean by an unbreakable chain. Following their interpretation of Surah 5, you can see the progression. It starts with Moses receiving the Torah, then it's passed to the prophets and rabbis who are entrusted with it, then Jesus comes and confirms it, and finally, the Quran itself is presented as another confirmation. The argument is that this creates a protected, unbroken chain of custody over the text.
Okay, but let's be real. No investigation is complete if you don't look at the other side of the coin, right? I mean, the Quran has verses that seem to say the complete opposite, that the scriptures were distorted. So the next logical step has to be seeing how this method deals with those apparent contradictions.
And this is it. This is the big one. The single most common and powerful objection. It's the question that immediately pops into your head. So to be credible, any argument about the Torah's reliability from a Quranic point of view has to have a really compelling answer for this exact point.
So Exhibit A for the counter-argument is often this verse right here. It talks about people writing a book with their own hands and then claiming it's from God. I mean, on the surface, that sounds like a slam dunk, a direct claim that the Bible was changed.
Okay, so the method's entire response hangs on this one crucial distinction. It asks us to separate two kinds of corruption. Let's break it down. On one side, you've got textual corruption. That's physically changing the words on the page. And on the other, you've got interpretive distortion, where the words stay the same, but you twist their meaning. The entire counterargument is built on this difference.
So when we look closer at that verse, here's the interpretation this method offers. Writing a scripture with their own hands means creating a new forgery, not altering an existing text. The thinking is, just because one person makes a fake copy, that doesn't corrupt all the other authentic copies out there. And what's more, they argue that if you're concealing a prophecy, well, that implies the prophecy was actually there in the original to begin with.
Then there's this other key verse you'll hear a lot, which talks about a group who alter the scripture with their tongues. That specific phrasing is absolutely central to how the method defines this idea of distortion.
So what does that even mean, alter with their tongues? Well, this goes right back to that core distinction we just talked about. The argument here is that this phrase points to someone misrepresenting the text out loud, like twisting the meaning as they preach, not physically changing the written words on the scroll.
And to back this up, the method points to classic Islamic scholarship. For instance, the famous 14th century commentator Ibn Kathir wrote that people distort their apparent meanings, but, and this is the key part, as for Allah's books, they are still preserved and cannot be changed. This is used as evidence that this distinction between meaning and text isn't some modern invention.
All right, so we've looked at the internal argument from the Quran. Now the method pivots and says, okay, let's look at the outside world. Let's look for physical, archaeological evidence and see if these claims hold up.
And the star of the show for external evidence? The Dead Sea Scrolls. If you're not familiar with these, they were an absolutely revolutionary discovery. A literal treasure trove of ancient manuscripts found in caves, including our oldest surviving copies of books from the Hebrew Bible.
Now the dates here are everything. I mean everything. The scrolls were written somewhere between 200 BC and 70 AD. Think about that. That means they were sealed away in caves for centuries before the Quran was revealed in the 7th century.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? The Dead Sea Scrolls basically act as a time capsule. They give us a perfect snapshot of what the Hebrew Bible's text looked like long before the 7th century, which allows for a direct, physical comparison across a huge stretch of time.
So what's the big reveal? What do they actually show? Well, when scholars compare, say, the ancient text of Genesis from the Dead Sea Scrolls to the text we have today, they find they are, quote, extremely similar.
Muslims say that the Torah is corrupted since there are variations, and they say that there is a wholesale corruption and that theology is significantly affected to the point that Torah can't be followed as guidance and light anymore. However, after investigating this, most of the variations are minor and don't affect the overall theology of the Torah. The evidence does not support a wholesale corruption.
This is huge. It means the physical evidence from way before the 7th century lines up remarkably well with the modern text.
So let's just boil this all down to the most crucial takeaway. The existence of the Dead Sea Scrolls means we're not just debating claims anymore. We have physical, verifiable copies of the Torah that are centuries older than the Quran. This moves the whole discussion from the theoretical to the tangible. We have the receipts, so to speak.
All right, we've looked at the case from inside the Quran, and we've looked at the archaeological proof from the outside. Now, let's bring it all home and see the final, logical point that this entire first pillar has been driving towards.
So, let's just walk through that chain of logic one more time. Step 1. The argument is made that the Quran affirms the Torah as it existed in the 7th century. Step 2. It claims this Torah had verifiable content. Step 3. Verses about distortion are argued to refer to interpretation, not the text itself. 4. An unbreakable chain is said to have guarded it. And finally, Step 5. The Dead Sea Scrolls provide physical proof that the text we have today is virtually identical to the text from before the 7th century.
So if you're going to remember just a few things from all this, here's what they are. First, the argument puts the Quran forward as a witness to the Torah's reliability in its own time. Second, it establishes that thanks to ancient manuscripts, this isn't just a debate about beliefs, it's a matter of direct comparison. And third, all of this sets the stage for the entire rest of the method, which is all about comparing the stories in the Quran to the stories in this now verifiable ancient text.
And you know, all of this, every single piece of this intricate argument has been carefully built to lead the conversation to one final, powerful question.
And this is it. This is the final question of Pillar 1. It takes all the evidence we've looked at, the internal testimony from the Quran, the external proof from the manuscripts, and it poses this major logical dilemma.
If Book A says Book B is reliable and we can prove we have the authentic Book B, what does it mean if their contents, their stories, are fundamentally different? This question is the master key that's meant to unlock the entire conversation, leaving everyone to really ponder its profound implications.